When looking at movement in the golf swing, I think one of the vastly underestimated influences is really where the eyes and the head go. So, when we're talking about really what influences what, so where the eyes go, does the head follow, etc., that's a conversation for really another day. Let's just talk about the movement of the head position throughout the golf swing, which would obviously be influenced and influence the eye position and therefore our, let's say, orientation, our awareness, our proprioception. So if we're looking at this player on the left-hand side, and we just put this little trace on the head movement just to illustrate this in a really nice simplistic way, we'll just play this through. So as that player moves back, you're going to see that red line, that red trace, really tracing the center of the head as it moves in backswing. And quite clearly see that trace moving forward towards the golf ball. So you could imagine perhaps someone has this little string and they're just pulling this player's head towards the ground as the player moves into backswing. Now you can imagine yourself what might occur, that sensation, that feeling, what adaptations might be, let's say, required from that position. So as that player moves forward in that backswing position, the head moving forward, that affecting the spine, that definitely affecting other segments in the body. You can see the pelvis starting to suck underneath the spine there at the top of the backswing. So to adjust for this little move, watch the pelvis just start to suck underneath as the head starts to move back in reaction to being so far forward. So all these downstream adjustments happening from this move. If we look at the player on the right hand side, this is later on in session, with the guideline being I've come over, simply place my hand just in front of the forehead here of the player and just encourage them as I move my hand towards them to move their head backwards. Now that was the encouragement. This swing on the right hand side that we're seeing is away from that. That's after this kind of drills, the tasks have been done. So this is the player on their own initiative really working through the backswing. So again, we see a very, very different trace this time. So that red line, the head moving more to the side as they go back. And we're going to see little sentiments, little trails of the old move there. We just see that old pattern, kind of the head nearly wanting to go back to where it's comfortable, where it was before, but very, very different as we get up top of backswing versus the left-hand side. So we can see very, very different profiles of the player on the right-hand side here. Instead of moving that head forward, they've definitively moved that head a little bit, if anything, forward towards the end, but much, much less than what we see on the right-hand side. So when we get to that position, we then see when this shift of this pelvis occurs, it still occurs, but much, much later towards the top of the backswing and at a lesser amount. So that would still be the goal, let's say, to work with this player would be to remove this adaptation of the pelvis shifting underneath to balance out what had occurred over here on the left-hand side with the head up to this point. So in the best possible hope or judgment, you really feel that, okay, if I change the core issue, then the other things, the other segments, the other movements will fall into place. That takes time for different players, different amounts of time. But what you're hopefully getting to is the core issue, the reason why all these adaptations take place. And then if they take place because of that issue, then the theory being if I remove that issue, they shouldn't take place anymore. But again, that takes time. So a lot of taking going on in this case. So if we were to look again very, very quickly, that left-hand side player, as the head and the eyes move towards the golf ball, towards the ground, that pulls the player forward. The adaptation then is I realize I'm too far forward. So now I need an opposite reaction movement. That'll be the pelvis moving under, the chest then moving back with the head to try and create space and balance this golf club out. On the right hand side, head moves much, much better in the backswing. Still have a little bit of that tendency in the downswing and transition just because they've done it for a long time, but definitely on the right track. So let's have a look from a different perspective and see what else this movement might affect. Okay, so now we're looking at it from a different perspective. This is the more down the line look, and we've got some different data parameters to look through. We've got our thorax thrust, which is basically the chest moving forward or away from the golf ball. So we have an F for forward, a B for back. And we've got our thorax side bend. Now, generally speaking, when we look at thorax side bend or chest side bend, we would look at it from a more front on perspective. But I really wanted to show it to you from this perspective because it's really affected by what we're talking about. So let's just have a look at those data. And again, the left-hand side is the player at the start of the session. Let's work that swing through. So we start working into that backswing position. And again, immediately we have that trace on the head. You'll see that trace, that head movement start to get pulled down towards the golf ball very early in that first move. And what we'll see as that player starts to work down is a couple of things. The thorax, the chest starts to thrust forward. That would make sense. And then we see this big thoracic side bend number. Now, generally speaking, when you look at thoracic side bend, everybody can be a little bit different. So we're not saying in this case, oh, well, 38 degrees is way too much. That player shouldn't be moving. But we're more concerned with how it's happened. So if we look at the player on the right-hand side, this is, again, more towards the end of the session. We work our way into that backswing position. As we work back, let's look again. We see the trace, very kind of not obvious in the trace because the player really hasn't moved us forward as they have on the left-hand side. But we look at that thorax thrust number. 2.88 centimeters back. So nearly kind of when we look at this, nearly about 6 centimeters, you're kind of delving into nearly 3 inches of difference between where the head has gone. And then when we kind of just use this little illustration, if I was to take out all the arrows and the little kind of drawings we have, and just simply get this line and just draw it along from kind of like the bottom of the rib cage up, left versus right, you kind of get a better definition or an idea of that side bend number that we're looking at. Of course, we can look at the value and just say, right, there's an 8-degree difference. But when you're looking at the movement, you kind of get the idea now. Overall, you look at the head as the encouragement, but you start seeing this very much this crunching of the lead side as the player moves back, this pulling down of the lead side as the player moves back. And then in transition, there's very, very quick adaptation on the left-hand side. So we'll start to see that side bend number really change very quickly as the player tries to get this lead side to move up, tries to get the pelvis under, tries to lower that club as quickly as they can. The right-hand side, we'll still see a change, but maybe not as quickly as that player moves in transition. So when you're looking at the movement of the head, the eyes, I think they're ever so much influential on other aspects in the golf swing. When you look at that and the idea that the player is being pulled too much towards the golf ball, that can be a problem in and itself. Where are the issues? Well, the overall body that's getting pulled, it gets compressed. We see that lead side bend get a little bit crunched. And then there's the adaptation in transition to try and move out of that position to create space and room to get the club on the golf ball. So one of those things I think doesn't really get enough attention, in my opinion, just my opinion, is where that head moves, how the head moves, and therefore where the eyes would follow. So if you're having a look at your own golf swing, look at it from both perspectives. Have a look from this perspective where the head moves, just simply like in a 2D version, just putting kind of a line here, just on top of the head there, and just seeing how that head moves in that backswing position. We see it move down and forward. And this player on the right-hand side kind of just doing the same thing. If we just take this line over here, and again, this is just a very kind of quick way of looking at it. But as we go back, what does that head do? Well, very, very different. Should a head not move? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But like in everything, there's spectrums of movements that are efficient and then maybe non-efficient. And in my mind, the movement of the head on the left-hand side has become non-efficient. The movement of the head on the right-hand side would be more efficient or more beneficial in the long run.